It's going to be so important to actually have true collaboration and to actually have a hub where everyone fits their pieces on the spoke together for that flywheel to actually take off.
You're telling us to innovate, but we're not seeing that translated in how we can get to another level in the academia to take this to the next level. Because sometimes the academics don't want to do the commercialization. They're perfectly happy to, enter into an agreement, whether it be a licensing agreement, etc. So I'm hoping that within not just this hub, but any of the others that are created under this larger umbrella of national development, that we create more synergies like that.
If I can't translate to a patient what I want them to do, how to do it, they're not going to do it. They're not going to make any changes. And then that defeats the purpose of getting back to the point of longevity.
So I think we need to create a space for dissemination and translation of some of this.
Business is very much science. As a scientist, you're failing most of the time, but it's that opportunity for success with that 1% that keeps you going. I think it's drawing that parallel because the failures teach you a lot more.
As a mother, I have struggled. We are hearing the need of bringing in the business into the science. Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Janice Badnock, Dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology at the UWI Cave Hill campus. And I'm thrilled to be in a room with an extraordinary mix of voices. We have global leaders from NVIDIA, Pangea Data, alongside our own local champions in the healthcare space, in government, academia, health and wellness. So I have the pleasure of guiding an exploration on longevity and what it means for small states, in particular for small states like Barbados. And with that, I am delighted to welcome to the island, for some of you, and to the north of the island for most of us, 5 distinguished panelists to the National Research and Development Program Longevity Roundtable. Can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Rashida Daisley. I am a medical professional and I am currently in academia. I also do quite a bit of advocacy in the women's health and NCD space. I'm thrilled to be here today.
Thank you. Welcome, Rashida.
Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Mark Boyce. I am the CEO of GovTech. GovTech is responsible for digital transformation in Barbados. Broadly speaking, that means making sure that the citizens and businesses are fit for purpose.
Excellent. Thank you.
Good morning again. Dr. Chelsea Sumner. I'm a pharmacist by training with a background in clinical research and pharma, and I support all of the healthcare AI startups for North Latin America and Africa at NVIDIA.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Chelsea.
Very good morning, and thank you for this opportunity. My name is Dr. Vibhor Gupta. I'm the founder of Pangea Data.
Welcome.
Good morning. I'm David Everman. I'm a physician leading our clinical team at Pangea Data. Delighted to be here.
And welcome to Barbados again.
Thank you.
I hope you're having a wonderful time.
Thank you.
So our first question, I'm kind of throwing it out to everyone or anyone that wants to answer. But when you hear the word longevity, what comes to mind first, specifically in your own field?
For me, as a clinician, definitely the first thing that comes to mind is health. And when I think of health, I think of the true definition of health, according to the WHO, which is not just the absence of the disease, but living well in many different dimensions. And when I think of longevity, I think of living well in those dimensions as we get older, because oftentimes when we think of getting older, sometimes what comes to mind, you think of persons that are decrepit, they're not doing well. But with longevity, we really want to make sure that persons are thinking holistically. So I think more so in the dimension of wellness.
Yeah, so I'm hearing thriving.
Yes,
as
thriving.
we age.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Mark, what about you? What do you think?
I mean, from a technology perspective, I think really about being able to predict how we are going to age in a better way than we can right now. So at the moment, it feels as if, for the technology we've had for the past 50 years or so, what happens is that you begin to experience old age and then the medical professionals begin to treat you for that. And I think that we are now rapidly entering an age where you can know beforehand how you are going to age and take some measures right now to prevent some of the ailments that you might get a little bit later on. So I think that we are entering an age where it's becoming easier for us to live better for longer with the help of technology.
So a predictive aspect going along with thriving.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Chelsea, how about you?
I think Rashida and Mark took the best answers. But I think just to piggyback on both of those themes of thriving and the predictive nature of longevity, what it really means is it's this new aspect of what I call the, after reading Outlive by Peter Attia, the medicine 3.0. So, we have sick patients and now we're going to get to preventative care. But really, what does that mean for how you give patient autonomy? And so, like, all of us are patients in various aspects. But as we think about what it means to live well, the ability to make the decision for yourself about what you want your life to look like, to thrive, and to have the predictive nature of what that means for the long term of the quality of your life, and to put it back in the patient's hands.
Over to Pangea.
I think about longevity a lot, but from a personal perspective. Could you spend more time with your families and do everything you want to do for them and for yourself? And how do you do it effectively without hitting bumps on the road? We hit them from a healthcare standpoint. We hit them in other aspects of life. And what can we do from a technical perspective to help smoothen those bumps so people can do whatever they aspire to do for themselves and their family, and do it in an effective manner.
But to you as well? What do you think of with longevity?
Yes, I think of it really in all of these ways, I think, combined. I think of it as starting with health is really the most important and valuable commodity that we all have. I think about optimizing that and providing as much meaning to that person throughout whatever number of years that they have, to help that person really find whatever is most important to them in life and embrace that, whether it's their family, whether it's something else beyond that. Just the ability to, as a human being, get the most out of the opportunity that you have to live.
Yeah, very good perspective there as well. So with that being said, now that we almost have a frame for what we think longevity is in our own spaces, why does it matter now for Barbados? Why is now so critical? Why is this our turning point for us and other small island states? Mark, maybe we'll start with you.
Well, Barbados has an aging population. We're not the only one globally, but it's acute. We know that we're going to need to take measures either from a sociological perspective or an economic perspective to fix this. And this aging population is going to become increasingly, unless we do something, it's going to become increasingly infirm. We know we have a high incidence of non-communicable diseases in Barbados. We might, I'm no doctor, but I think we might be the non-communicable disease capital of the Caribbean, for some of them at least. So certainly we have some issues that we have to address from a health perspective, given that our population is living longer and is likely to experience a higher incidence of these types of diseases. So now is the time to really start thinking about what that means from a technological perspective. How do we harness the abilities that we have right now, given our population is living longer, to allow them to live better during their later years? So yeah, I think Barbados, among other countries in the world, really has a problem that it has to confront when it comes to longevity in terms of not just lifespan, but health span.
So Rashida, if we can come back in on that point, one could argue that Barbados has quite a number of centenarians. Yes. We are known for living long. So why is it still important for us? Is it the quality of how they're living?
So 2 points. So definitely the quality of the lives that our elderly population are living. But I also think of our declining fertility rates as well. So we do hear quite a bit from our Prime Minister in terms of trying to increase our fertility rate. And we often overlook that, but that's critical as we look at longevity, both from a health perspective and an economic perspective as well. Because as persons are living longer, they're having these non-communicable diseases. They place place burden on our healthcare system. But with declining populations, there are going to be less working age persons over a period of time to support these older populations. So we also have to think about that as well. As Mark mentioned, we do have quite a high prevalence of non-communicable diseases as well. And we have one tertiary facility on Alleyne. So these non-communicable diseases do have complications. We have things such as heart attacks, stroke, kidney failure, and so on. And they really do place a strain on our healthcare system and our healthcare workforce as well.
So you brought in an interesting perspective there, because we say longevity, and for me, my brain goes immediately to the aging aspect of it. I'm bringing in the aspect that says this is a holistic, the whole life cycle, and that fertility also will play in and factor into how we think about longevity. That's an important point, and I'm glad you made.
Definitely.
Thanks for that. So Chelsea, if I can bring you in and bring in a more global perspective to this one, how do you see, in particular in your role at NVIDIA, AI shaping the future of health and well-being globally? And what lessons might be relevant for small states? You've been here, you've seen us, you've interacted with us, you see our community, you see our culture. How does that work for us?
I think for a couple of things. When you look at healthcare and AI from a global perspective, we all are facing the longevity issue, where we have longer lifespans, but that doesn't mean longer health spans, to the point that we've been talking about so far. And when you think about AI with that ability to translate that into healthcare, we have the predictive nature of AI that allows the idea to be able to say, oh, what possibly can happen? What can I look to from a preventative standpoint? But I also think that it raises a couple questions. I think yesterday we posed it as, it's not the amount of years in your life, but the amount of life in your years. And the ability for AI to help democratize AI for healthcare is really important as we think about the global conversation of longevity, and what that can mean for small states like Barbados. And so I think when you hear AI, it can also be kind of frightening, because to older populations, thinking about how do you add that in as something that they want to do. And that's something that we see globally. How do you take away some of that fear about what it means to have AI helping, or how to augment your health with AI? So at NVIDIA, we're trying to help create these tools for anyone to be able to access the ability to take autonomy of your own data, your own health, to be able to advocate for that. And I think that that advocacy, when you equip patients with the ability to advocate for themselves and advocate for their health, you have the opportunity to leapfrog into a new future. So it doesn't mean that you're starting from scratch, that it gives you the opportunity to say, okay, what has everyone else done? And how can we learn from that? And how can we skip some steps to be able to take it on to the future? And I think Barbados is uniquely positioned to be able to do that. You have a government here that is supportive. You have research and universities here for an educated population, the ability to say, what can we do and how do we make it better? But how do we put more life in all of our years?
Yeah, that was yesterday's summit when we were talking. There were conversations around data sovereignty. And if I were to define generally what Barbadians are, one word or two words that would come up would be risk averse, quite risk averse. So what do you think needs to be put in place to really illustrate that they will have their sovereignty of their own data? Like what role do you think NVIDIA or companies like NVIDIA could play in helping give that reassurance?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think something that we work really hard to do at NVIDIA is to educate. There's very much a lack of awareness around what AI can do and what's hype. And so the conversation about having real, honest conversations and transparent conversations about like just education, what AI is, what it can do for you, the ability for it to augment your health, the ability for that. Most people have smartphones. How they're leveraging those smartphones can actually keep their data within themselves, and then again be able to use it to say, hey, I actually would like you to do this for me because I know that my smartwatch has told me that I didn't get great sleep. Are there opportunities to improve my sleep? And so then you you have a conversation with your healthcare provider and not a conversation where they're telling you something, but you feel empowered to tell them something instead. And I think, again, we are equipping clinicians with the tools to be able to have more patient engagement with AI scribes, with generative AI to document these things. So NVIDIA is really looking on both sides of from a patient perspective, but also a provider and clinician's perspective to really put that advocacy back into a patient's hands with what we call sovereignty of you control it, you have the ability to advocate, and then to the control over your own life. And we see that as providers, that patients really want to feel involved in their care. And I think that that's a conversation that has to be in the framework of how do you get someone who's risk averse to want to feel empowered. We give them the power to be able to do that.
Okay, thank you very much for that reassurance. So Vipur, as well as to David, this question I'm going to frame to both of you, so hopefully you can both answer. So your data works at the cutting edge of early diagnosis and personalized care. How do you see longevity as a field of practice rather than just theory? And then I also want you to come in on the second part of the question I posed to Chelsea about risk-averse Barbadians and other citizens of other small island states and how we address that.
You know, if I may start, let me take the second question first. You know, we've all heard about risk, right now about driverless cars. That seems to be the new thing. And if I was to talk about that 5 years ago with people even in Silicon Valley where I live, there would be a lot of adverse, reactions to that concept for various variety of different reasons. And I think as humans, it's innate in us that for everything we hear about, we always think about it in the context of, is that really a value add in our current lives and what we are doing? And if it is, at what cost does it come? It's just natural for us to think like that. And I think as has happened with driverless cars, as they are being driven on the road, as people are using them and people are getting more educated, to Chelsea's point, people are becoming more accepting of them. So you will always have a pool of early adopters who will drive the transformation and the change. And then you'll always have a larger pool of followers who will learn from that, along with very much the people who built that technology, who were improvising on it, based on feedback from these early adopters. And then that's what would lead to a scalable utilization. In the clinical practice, I can speak from personal experience where, electronic health record systems were really, and even till this day, are not considered a very useful tool, dare I say this. And a lot of clinicians, when you're training in med school, would be averse to using them. They would say, well, it adds 20 minutes more to my time with a patient, and what do I get out of it, right? Does that mean that there is no value add? They clearly understand that there is value add here. And but again, it's a process of education, and it's a process of demonstrating that return on investment over a period of time, so everybody comes on board and realizes that this is something that is not just useful because your boss has told you to use it or compliance requires it, but it actually can help you do what's best for the patient once you actually have the data in a digital form. So that's how I see a transformation happening in general. And the same applies in the context of some of these new constructs that we're building in mathematics and computing. Today, you call them artificial intelligence. 25 years ago, when I started out learning about them, they were called neural networks. I guess, we just have to produce more case studies, more success stories, and honestly highlight what the advantages are and where more work needs to be done to educate people, again, at the point that was made previously, so that, we tell them that we're on a journey here. That's my perspective about that. How it applies to longevity, at this point, I'll hand it over to Dr. Everman. Who's better place to talk about it?
Well, my perspective on these things, I think, comes from my years of practice in medicine and sort of starting out in the field and realizing there was so much to learn, so much to understand, deciding I wanted to go into pediatrics, and then deciding I wanted to go into a very cutting edge field, medical genetics. And at the time that I went into that field, we didn't have the technologies that we have now to be able to sequence a person's genome and find information there that can lead to answers, but can also perhaps lead to more questions or ethical concerns. So I think kind of living through that era of the development of genomic medicine, I sort of go back to basic principles in that we as humans, we like to understand what's happening. A lot of people are looking for answers, and despite being engaged with the healthcare system, with lots of different people, with lots of different tests, they are on these journeys where they're still seeking answers. So in genetics, we always called that the odyssey, the diagnostic odyssey. And I always looked at it as people are sort of in the darkness and looking for a light to be turned on for them and to help find their way. And so I think really the principle for me as I think about applying AI to healthcare is really the same idea. It's just a better, more sophisticated way to do it that can really help us as humans to really understand things about ourselves as humans that are very complicated. And so I think we're now at a time in medicine where three sort of things are coming together. We have much greater knowledge of biology and health. We have much more data now about each of us as individuals. And we have technologies that allow us to analyze that data, understand the connections between different pieces of that, and to engage with each other, to communicate, to learn, to understand how we as an individual really, how all that pertains to us. So there's this field of medicine, personalized medicine, that has really evolved out of all of this. And I think really we're now at a point where using technology will allow us to really realize the potential of all that for the good of everyone. And I think, we just need to be careful and make sure that we apply it and use it carefully and correctly.
Yeah, in a very ethical way. I think that's important.
Exactly.
So what I found most interesting in the last two interventions was I'm thinking that I may have to reframe the phrase risk averse. And I'll just maybe you say that we just need more case studies. We just need more success stories. So we're not necessarily risk averse. We're just lacking in those success stories. And so if we can frame out those success stories and really show how it is of value, then we are more likely to get more early adopters. I'm still waiting for a car that can fold up like the Jetsons. I am. I will be an early adopter if I don't have to deal with parking. So if there's any way possible that we can fast track that point, I think that you will get quite a number of people adopting that technology in Barbados as well. I also wonder, and maybe I'll also just pose this, should we have stayed away from the use of the term artificial intelligence? Do you think that we would have gotten more traction if we hadn't used artificial intelligence as the phrase? And I'm saying that just because we've all watched the shows, we've all watched the movies. And so with naming it as such, and it is artificial intelligence, but naming it as such, do you think we would have gotten a little bit more adopters if it wasn't named that way? What do you think?
I think so. I think so. As I was listening to Mark talk about predictive models, I think that may have been a better name, because we have been using data in healthcare for many, many years. To develop the drugs that we need to give our patients, we needed to use this data to build predictive models to help us. We use it when we're looking at clinical risk assessment. So we do use predictive models. As you mentioned beforehand, our society sometimes can have a stigma to some of these terms. So I think maybe terming it in something that's a bit more palatable may have been helpful. Yeah. I do have a question though, if that's
Please.
okay. So I know we're talking a lot about data and using patient autonomy, but I feel that we're missing a critical component in the conversation, which is health literacy and potentially digital literacy as well, especially if we want to give the patients the opportunity to make decisions for themselves. Oftentimes, when I'm having discussions with my patients, I try to make the information very digestible to them, and sometimes they can be overwhelmed with very simple data. So what do we think potentially, or how can we really bridge that gap in terms of both health and digital literacy to make sure our patients are making informed decisions? Because they're not just having access to this information, but they're informed and they have the knowledge. So what can we do for that?
I think there's a couple of things with the way that technology continues to transform. I think literacy is something that it's also going to be transformed in that process. And so, we're taught as clinicians to think that speak at a third grade level so that everyone can understand what you're saying and how you're saying it. And I think that that's one of the unique things that once you get to a certain level of education, it's a little bit harder to think back to, okay, how do I phrase this simply? But technology can do that a little bit more easier than we can. And so when you have speech and conversational AI that can listen to someone and hear what they're saying and then translate that into a way that makes it easier for the health literacy piece or the digitization literacy, I think that that's one of those components that can help. And so we don't use that as often because we think about AI in the terms of, oh, this is something that it's going to shift the way that I'm doing this. But if you can keep the workflow, so to speak, the same or similar to what's already being done, where someone is speaking in their casual and their normal tone, and we have enough data of that specific dialect or that specific tone, then it gives it back in a way that it's the same and not something that's foreign. And so the foreign piece is usually what makes a little bit more risk averse or the prevention from being able to understand. But if we give it back in a way that the tools that we're using don't disrupt the workflow, but also make it easier for us to be able to communicate with patients, I think that's what provides that that additional, not feel good, but that additional way to connect.
Okay.
I think that we're moving more towards personalized technology in every domain. And I think that will apply to literacy as well. So it will be the case that as we get more information about every individual, we'll be able to tailor solutions that are more specific to the needs of a particular individual. And that will extend to their ability to understand and to follow along with technology as it evolves. So I think that the technology itself will help to make people more literate in technology as we go along.
So adopting, being the catalyst for more adoption. So
I
to
suspect
speak.
so, yeah.
What do you think, Vibhor?
I'm going to use another analogy from, if 15 years ago my niece came to me and she said, at 11 o'clock at night, I'm clicking a button and a stranger is going to come in their own car and pick me up and drop me where I need to go, I would have had something to say about that in not so pleasant terms. Point is that you're always looking for accountability. You're always trying to, again, going back to that human reaction, you're trying to say, who's got this? If something goes wrong, who is protecting me? And in this example, my niece, right? And what is the regulation around that? And that's where I think governments have a great role to play, and they've done it really well, where they're not being an impediment, but they're kind of providing the guardrails, which allow companies like these ride-hailing apps now that we use so frequently, to operate with us, from the comfort that, we know that if something goes wrong, then somebody's there to protect us. The reason I share that story is because in clinical practice, I've seen this a lot where patients would come and say, well, we don't want to get our labs done. We don't know what we're going to find. And if there's a problem, it's going to impact my work and my family stress levels are going to go through the roof. And we also don't know what we need to do next, right? So again, it's like, giving that comfort when they're sitting across the table to say, hey, don't worry, we've got this. And if something goes wrong, we are here to help you. And having that accountability, which I have seen, it can vary across different countries. And as a result of that, people, even if some of their labs came out, not in their favor, they would say, well, we're asymptomatic, so we're not going to do anything about it. So, in spite of all the literacy, in spite of all the information being there, that next step that needs to happen to do what's best for them from a healthcare perspective really comes from that personal touch of giving them the assurance, as I'm sure the clinicians here around the table would agree, that that you are being taken care of, and if something goes sideways, we have a way to fix it, right? Rather than it's a hope and a prayer. And I think that's the same applies to technology being applied in healthcare, where, I've heard stories where people would say, I would love for the AI to process, to be used on my digital records if they're available, but I just want to make sure that they're not missing anything, right? And as long as you can, again, through those case studies, provide them that assurance and be very transparent about what it can do and cannot do, so you're not over-promising, but equally you're not sort of underplaying it, then I think the larger population would be quite accepting of it. We actually had a study around this, dare I say, talk about case study. In the northern part of England, there was a famous study conducted around COPD and asthma. And a large population of patients were asked to give away access to their data for the study. And you can imagine this is back in 2006 or 7. So of course, the expected reaction was a strict no. Whereas when the scientists and the clinicians, not the marketeers, not the salespeople, actually went and talked to that population and just explained them what the study was for, which was actually to learn more about these diseases so that other people don't have to go through the same, the entire population said yes to be sharing their data for this research purpose. So again, I think it comes with communication, but also developing that personal touch with the people you're working with to demonstrate that, there is accountability here.
Yeah.
And you're not
Thank
at
you for
risk.
that.
It's like accountability begets trust, and then trust begets adoption.
There you go. There you have. So, David, I also want you to weigh in on this. How, in your practice, how have you been able to transform the digital literacy and health literacy in your own practice?
Yes. Well, most of my experience, I would say, is from the pre-AI area. But I think the concept is the same. And the concept is really new technology coming along that is new. It's an unknown. It's scary for the patients and for the providers. And for me in my career in practice, that was really more genetics and genomics. But I think the principle is really the same with artificial intelligence. And that is that when this technology first came out, I, as a provider, was reluctant to use it because you start to lose some control. You start to feel like, well, I can test that gene or that gene, but if I sequence every single gene in an entire person, what am I going to find? And do I want to know that? Does the patient want to know that? So there's sort of a fear of the unknown. But once I became comfortable with that, I realized that it could be a very empowering technology to really drastically improve healthcare across the lifespan. And I think the way artificial intelligence is coming along has been attractive to me because of that experience that I had in the field of genomic medicine. And realizing that was the previous wave, so to speak, and now the next wave to really stay at the forefront of healthcare is to think about, not getting that data now, because we're very good at getting that genomic data. We're very good at getting lots of clinical data now of all types. Now it's how do we use that to the benefit of our patients and our society. And so I think the way I look at AI, going back to what you said about should we have called it something different? I think I've heard the term augmented intelligence, and I really think that's really what we in medicine really embrace, is the fact that we know a lot just from our own experience in practice, and that clinical judgment that takes years to develop is very important, I think, for taking care of patients. And I think the way that physicians and other clinicians interact with patients is, you can't replace that with technology. It's a very human interaction. But I think we all want the ability to provide better care, and we all use tools that augment our human abilities in some way. I remember learning about the stethoscope, and I think the early stethoscope was really a clinician putting their ear to a patient's chest, right? And then gradually the technology improved to the point that we can augment our ability to hear what's going on inside the patient's body. And so that's kind of the way I think about AI. Is it's another tool. It's really another thing that we can either run from, or we can embrace and make it the best it can be to augment our ability to practice medicine.
I very much like the augmented intelligence. I did. It would still be AI, but it really would remove the artificial and what that, I think, the connotation is behind that. And I also want to thank you for sharing what I think is a fairly personal opinion on your initial reluctance, because I think we also need to hear more examples of that, where you had some reluctance and then you adopted, and then look what the transformation was. So thank you very much for that. I also was hearing quite a bit in recent conversations around what would a medical institution or a medical educational institution look like in another 5 years. Will it be so much about the content? And maybe I, as a science, also have that conversation that I need to have. What should it look like? Or should, in the case of medicine, it be more about the care than about the data of learning this disease and learning that, which can be supported, augmented by AI. So I think that's really good for us to have a deeper conversation around that point. I do want to circle back into what I will broadly call the local space.